The quantum field is made up of pure potential that is expressed as waveforms. Our consciousness acts as an antenna that translates these waveforms into what's known as interference patterns, and then once more into particles that make up everything in the physical world, including ourselves. But providing the raw materials for reality is not where the magic of waveforms stop. They also shape an infinite number of past, present, and futures. We call these past, present, and futures a timeline. For anyone who is familiar with the Mandela effect, that is one of the most common examples of memories being carried over from a prior timeline we were on into the timeline we currently occupy. We are shifting timelines more often than not, and many anomalies are left as the artifacts of this. With the quantum field consisting of limitless potential, the way it even knows what timeline to activate and to materialize is through a feedback loop. In fact, when you're operating at this level of reality, it's so ambiguous you will need a feedback loop to guide the output. And the guiding force that tells this feedback loop what to produce is the choices we make. These probabilities are like vibrational momentum building up, much like an ocean wave. These probabilities continue to drop off and further narrow the more we focus our choices until probability turns into actuality, which is what has manifested. And this process happens every single moment. So let's say we choose to venture down a path of awakening our consciousness. The quantum field organizes a new trajectory with the full unfoldment of that choice, containing all possibilities and all probabilities. So the more conscious we become, the more we are reinforcing the timelines that reflect that choice. What this does is establish a feedback loop between us and all of the potential future versions of ourselves that we are aligning with. And through this feedback loop, the potential future versions of ourselves send us the resources we would require in order to actualize them. This is also reflected in the ancient wisdom, you cannot travel the path until you become the path itself. Your choices now are already activating potential future versions of yourself. There are multiple versions of reality on Earth, and we are constantly aligning, otherwise known as jumping, timelines, whether we are conscious of it or not. So we can look at timelines a few different ways. We have personal timelines and collective timelines. There are events constantly happening that continuously alter these timelines again and again. Our personal timelines consist of the past and present choices we make every day. They are impacted by our trauma, socioeconomic status, karmic imprints, desires, and belief systems. Depending on how much of our free will we are using, we either make predictable and established choices that we hope lead to a future we have envisioned, or we can implement more chance and uncertainty that would open up the timelines containing entirely different potential futures. If we are content on our current trajectory, the less likely we are to make radical choices that would lead to radical changes in direction. So it's a matter of personal preference. However, this is where fate comes into play. There is a degree of fate that is at work in our life, just as there is a degree of free will. Fate is the lessons we came into this life wanting to experience, and free will is the journey of how those lessons are lived. Fate can and does intervene when it feels we are not as proactive as we could be. But what is not guaranteed is how well our outcomes come into fruition. That is all left up to our actions, discernment, and willpower. Now let's focus on the collective timelines. Imagine that there is already multiple versions of reality on Earth, and in the past of one of these versions of reality, World War I never happened. That would significantly alter the future of that reality, not to mention the ripples that would create. Now apply the same concept to any event that was devastating and could be traumatizing to our collective psyche. And you could see that although there is an infinite number of potential timelines, that it's less likely we'd be able to access the ones that are prosperous and optimal if our collective psyche is continuously being directed into timelines that are traumatizing and disempowering. As I mentioned, we shift collective timelines frequently, but the wider the jump from our current reality, the more awareness is required to do so. What this means is if we want to experience an optimal and prosperous timeline, we would need to stop feeding the official narratives that limit our true potential and start taking conscious actions that reflect the timeline we want to call forth.
So the main way that revelation of the method is carried out is through something known as predictive programming. Predictive programming is when we are already infused in the collective consciousness with visuals and images of an event before it's about to play out. And then we're seeing it in one arena in one way, and then in similar ways across different avenues of media. So they might not always be able to make a clear connection because they'll be similar but not identical events. It's all to get the essence of this imagery into our collective consciousness. And this is why reality looks so set in stone. It looks like it's on a specific railroad track, if you will. It's because we're so used to this imagery that we're exposed to by the time that something happens that it's like we've been prepared and we've been conditioned for it, and it's because we have. We've already seen these things, and so naturally we see them entered into our reality, and we've already accepted it as reality itself. We even scoff at different things that we can't conceive of because it hasn't entered our field yet through predictive programming. So paradigm blindness is also a part of a very heavily conditioned mind. The other avenue for revelation of the method is through repetition. Repetition plays a very strong role in this because we need to have things so normalized to us that by the time we're in that timeline or that event happens, we've already been subconsciously aware of it and expecting it. And that's done through repetition. This is why you see in the media certain phrases said over and over and over again, and certain sound bites taken and sensationalized. They need to have our minds strongly prepared for these experiences and events, and that's done through repetition and through strong imagery. This is how they bypass our conscious mind and get consent through our subconscious. And our subconscious is really the one who's running the show, because the subconscious mind is tenfold more powerful than the conscious mind. This has already been proven, and some people have even calibrated the subconscious mind to be 1 trillion times more stronger than the conscious mind. So they reveal to us what they are going to do, and then they enhance that with the imagery and the sensational speech and all of the repetition of these things going on within our collective world stage. By the time revelation of the method has been drawn into manifestation, we are experiencing what's known the state of shock. Now, shock can be used for very beneficial and positive means, and it can be used for very detrimental and negative means. The positive means are mainly used in esotericism and mysticism as ways to activate higher consciousness